Hello and welcome to the Powered by Rock podcast, where we're going to be speaking with a longtime friend and one of the best damn guitar players I've known personally, who has an upcoming EP about to hit the internet. It's Mitch Purvis of Commoneer, coming up next.
You're listening to the Powered by Rock podcast with your host, Isaac Kuhlman. The Powered by Rock podcast was created to help showcase some of the best rock musicians in the world and to pass on to future generations the rock music that has inspired rock fans around the world for decades. We want listeners to be able to hear great stories and life experiences directly from their favorite artists, as well as dig deeper into music theory and talk rock like no other show you've ever heard. This isn't about looking cool, it's about getting real and having a great time. Without further ado, let's start the show.
Hey, welcome to the Powered by Rock podcast. Today's an excellent show because I get to talk all things rock with a good friend of mine, someone I've known since about 2001 or so, a man who shreds incredibly hard on the old six string, and he has just added a newborn daughter on top of the two sons of his ever-growing future family band. I can only imagine how insanely time-crunched and stressful putting out new music must be, but after all that, here he is putting out another EP for his musical project, Commoneer. Mitch Purvis, welcome to the show, Mitch.
Hey, buddy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, good to have you here.
Applause.
Yeah. So I think it's funny because obviously the intro song is it's actually Ryan, who is from Speedway Sleeper and your band, Birds Love Filters. And I told him I'll probably never get to interview another person who did the intro, but I guess here's another person who also was part of the intro.
Yeah, although I don't get to take too much credit for that song. A little bit of lead guitar, but Ryan was really the driving force behind that band. Yeah,
and it's a great song. So, like I said, bring it on. And it's the best intro music, I think, of all time. So anybody else who has intro music for their show, you
can't
messed up.
Yep.
Yeah. So obviously the first thing I want to say is congratulations on the baby girl. How are the boys taken and how insane is the life right now?
It's crazy. It's time consuming. I feel like we're starting the Purvis family instead of the Partridge family. So we'll have like a 5-piece rock band here in no time, but it's good. I've enjoyed, I've had a month off from work. So that's been nice. Giving me a little bit of time to kind of do some of the promotional things for the new EP, which I'm not good at all. So, trying to get the word out there a little bit and, do all the finishing touches, which are the things that I just absolutely suck at.
Yeah. The mastering and then the track listing and all that good stuff. It's all got to go somewhere. And as independent musicians, that's the stuff that can be time consuming for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So before we get into some of the deeper, greater topics that I want to bring up today, I first want to ask about your journey, because this is something that, other than myself and maybe Ryan and a couple of our friends, a lot of people aren't going to know. And it's always good to get the backstory. So what was kind of the reason you started playing music, and what were some of the influences you had artist wise, or maybe people around you? And when did you decide that, I want to do this long term, whether it's, as a hobby or, as a side project or whatever, but, you've been a lifelong musician like myself. So how did you decide that this was something you wanted to do?
Yeah, I kind of grew up in a musical family to a certain extent. My grandma on my mom's side was a music teacher in middle school and high school. And my mom was pretty musically inclined herself. She did a lot of singing. My dad played the flute. It's kind of a weird instrument, but he's always played the flute, still does, plays in like a
little Ron Burgundy's like jazz flautist.
Yeah, he's still rocking it, plays in kind of like a folk type, they do dances, like traditional folk dances, and then play, whatever Russian folk music or
That's awesome.
Irish folk music, Celtic music and stuff like that. So, they encouraged me to do things musically when I was younger, and I never did, unfortunately. Like I remember my mom begging me to play piano or join a choir, and I always kind of felt like I didn't want to do that. I was a sports guy when I was growing up, so played basketball and baseball, and then transitioned to golf. But by the time I got to high school, I got the bug. A good friend of ours you just spoke to on the podcast, Ryan Nelson from Speedway Sleeper, he picked up an acoustic guitar when we were 14, 15, somewhere in there, and pressured me to grab one too. So I did, and then found myself skipping class to play guitar, and didn't.
So he was like a drug pusher, but it was like a guitar instead of like weed or something.
Yeah,
Hey man, let's
So
skip school and let's go play guitar.
that was pretty much it. So, we started writing songs in my basement, and I sort of took a liking to lead guitar, started playing a lot of lead guitar. He was, doing a lot of songwriting and really proficient at the rhythm parts and all that stuff. So I found myself just kind of being an accompaniment to him. And from there, it just continued to evolve, played in a couple of bands in Eugene for 6, 7, 8 years, somewhere in there. One of which I just primarily played lead guitar again, and then another that I fronted after that, and started my journey into songwriting. And that, was kind of short-lived. My wife and I moved to Portland area after that, and I found myself kind of solo and with kids. And, when you have kids, they're extremely time consuming. So you got to find a way to start making music on your own and do the closet recording thing. So I found myself doing that, put out a little EP in 2017 that, I was pretty proud of, and thought that it was something I should build on. So I kind of stuck with the brand, stuck with the Commoneer name. And now here's EP number 2 coming out soon.
Nice. So obviously when you moved into the Commoneer project, I mean, what was that decision like? I mean, was it just, hey, I don't want to put music out as Mitch Purvis, or was it like, I don't know how often I'm going to put music out, so maybe this is just a one-off thing for now and see what happens?
I kind of thought I wanted to start a band. So I was trying to get a band name going, from the start. And the original intent was to try to grab other musicians who might want to, play the other parts. And over time, I found it just, I don't know, too time consuming, or again, I'm not a good marketer. So I'm not good at getting out and asking people to, come over and jam or.
Yeah. Well, if you're in the Portland area, I'll give you Mitch's phone number and the link below.
There you go. So yeah, I went through the painstaking process of picking a band name, which is never easy. And I'm one of those hyper insecure individuals sometimes who, probably that's part of the reason why I didn't want to use my first and last name.
Yeah.
So yeah, settled on.
Want to call it the Mitch Purvis Project or the Mitch Purvis 3 or something?
Yeah. It'd be a hit in Holland, big Dutch last name. So
yeah,
maybe I'll do that there.
Yeah. Well, I know one of the previous band names that we had kind of kicked around for a band that we fictionally put together was called Suddenly Susan. Why didn't you go with that?
You know what? Suddenly Susan, they stood alone in their own right. So there's no way that I could trample on that name. It would be sacrilegious.
Yeah, I think you actually came up with that obviously based on what was it, Brooke Shields TV show from back in like the late 90s, early 2000s. For some reason, that was you latched onto that name as like, let's call our band Suddenly Susan. I'm like, why the hell would we do that?
Yeah, why not?
So let's talk about the new EP that you're putting out later this month, which, oh, by the way, you'll see a link to pre-save it in the show notes. But I know that you have been working your ass off on this EP. It takes guys like you and I kind of a while to feel like our final project is good. In fact, I know for myself, I pretty much at some point just say, fuck it. Getting it out there is better than nothing. And it's not going to get any better because I'm just not going to put the time in at this point to make it much better. And I just released the music, but that's me. That's probably why nobody ever likes my music, and I'm the only fan that I have. But what's your take on the process to make this EP and the production side in general?
Oh gosh, yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for me, it started with a bunch of songs from previous bands and previous projects I was in that just were sitting unfinished. And I liked them enough that I felt like, they deserved a chance to be a finished product and actually have people listen to them. So that's kind of where I found myself. The first EP, all 6 songs were songs that I had previously written that, again, they were just sitting there. So I decided to finish them on my own. And then this new EP, I had a couple still left over that I really like. Decided that I wanted to, kind of take them in a different direction, rework the lyrics a little bit. And then through that process of, getting those tracks down and doing the other instruments and the mixing and the mastering, you're diddling around and coming up with new riffs and, new sparks of inspiration flying about. And, 4 other songs ended up kind of sticking to the wall as well. So from there, I've done most of the instrumentation myself. So it's been a lot of sitting around and whether it's jamming on a bass or a guitar or a keyboard, just kind of, catch something that you feel like is worth sticking with, and then see what happens, flesh it out and see if it turns into a song.
Yeah. And just kind of to give an idea of, the process and the length of time sometimes it takes. I mean, how long have you been working on this? What is it? 6 songs now, I think 6 or 7 songs.
Yeah. Geez. I mean, I probably started in earnest 18 months ago.
Yeah.
2 years ago, somewhere in there. It started with 2 songs that I spent way too much time on. And, I think somebody who does mixing and arranging and producing, you can appreciate that you can get stuck in a rut sometimes trying to get a track to sound perfect. And, in your mind, it sounds like a certain thing. And then when you actually play it back, if it's not quite there, you just think, oh, well, I'm going to tweak this a little bit, or I'm going to add this layer, or I'm going to take something away and I'm going to turn it into exactly what it needs to sound like. And, I did that for quite a while, trying to just polish 2 songs, thinking that, I just wanted to kind of put them out as standalones. And again, throughout that process, jamming on some other stuff, I sort of stumbled upon some other riffs that eventually evolved into, hey, this could be a song. And then, lo and behold, I've got 6 tracks that, the other 4 certainly was a more speedy process. Although I can get caught in the weeds really bad. And I have a tendency to get caught in the weeds really bad. So,
So, I mean, for people out there who are like, oh yeah, I want to produce my own music. There's a steep learning curve, I think, for a lot of us. And then not only is it the learning curve, but the over analytical part of that, when you're the one left to do your own mixing and mastering, you will tinker to nth degrees that probably a professional might not. Like, there's like, here's what I think it should sound like, and here's what it's going to sound like. And then it comes back to you and you're like, pretty close. Here's some notes, and then it's done. But like, you're doing it yourself. And in the end, I think that's kind of what you did with the full EP, is you actually got some help with the end production and the mastering as well, didn't you?
Yeah, the mastering, I've used the same guy for both records, actually. So I'm pretty much doing everything except for the mastering. And the aforementioned Ryan Nelson, he's helped me with some bass parts as well, which has been huge. But Audio Siege, I got to give a shout out to Brad Boatwright at Audio Siege up here in Portland. He's a phenomenal mastering engineer. He's done some pretty well-known albums. He actually did the Stranger Things soundtrack.
Oh, wow.
Mastered that and received some awards for it. So he's a great guy, does an awesome job, is much faster, and obviously, needless to say, much better than I could ever be at mastering a track. But, I think mastering is something that it's almost better left to a different set of ears.
Yep.
You can, you get caught up in a rut sometimes, or you get an idea of what your song needs to sound like in your head. But if you don't get somebody else's take on it, if you don't get somebody else's ears going, hey, if you did this, or you switch this around, or you raise this level, or you EQ'd it this way, you're not going to get, as good an end result. Honestly, I think you're going to get a much better end result if you have another set of ears doing that final process.
Yeah. And I'll say, my idea of mastering is, let's just turn this volume up on this and see how good it sounds.
Yeah, man, just squash it. Just throw the limiters on there and get it up there.
I'm the best at mastering. So yeah, don't do that. But so obviously during the process of making this EP, I've actually provided some feedback back and forth, because you actually have sent me some demo tracks and demo versions of the tracks. And, at one point I really, really, really wanted to put some drums together for, I think it was West to Desert. And it turns out I can't play drums as well as I thought. And I believe the song ended up being in like 3/4 timing or something. And it took me like a week to figure that out. And by the time I did, I was like, man, I'm a fucking idiot. Like, I just spent a week trying to put a drum thing to this that was in 4/4 timing, and it's been in the wrong timing the whole time. So I think he did the smart thing and just said, fuck waiting for Isaac. I'm just going to like do this. And he's never going to figure this shit out. He's not as good as a drum machine. So, and it sounds great. So it's obviously, in my head, I wanted it to sound something better for you, but my abilities are not quite what I thought they were going to be. So how do you like using the non-human drums yourself, and what has that kind of brought to the process as well?
That's a process I really enjoy. And, I honestly, I wish that I were a better drummer, because I look at awesome drummers and I admire them, as much or more than I do great guitar players or great singers, because that is an instrument or a set of instruments that is very tough to master.
Yeah.
And, I have enjoyed, I think I have kind of maybe a unique approach to doing digital drums. I tend to go piece by piece and sample by sample and kind of piece them together as I go, which may not be the smartest way to do it, because it ends up being pretty darn time consuming. And, I've always wanted my drums to sound like a real drummer,
Yeah.
instead of sounding like a drum machine.
Yeah. Like
so-
like playing 64th notes all the time. And like, what's going on here?
Drum machines have a place, and there's nothing wrong with them. And certainly, there's a lot of awesome drum machines and loops and samples that you can use, and things like Easy Drummer or other plugins and softwares that you can use that are going to sound, just as good, if not better, than the drum tracks that I'm making. But I do find a lot of enjoyment in taking those individual hits, whether it's a snare or a kick or cymbals, and EQing them a little bit or adding a second layer to it to make it sound just a little bit different, and then trying to piece them together like an actual drummer would piece a drum track together.
Yeah.
I enjoy the musicality of drums for people who, aren't playing just something 4 on the floor, real standard. I think one of the drummers that you and I both really admire is the drummer from Coheed and Cambria. I think his name's Josh Eppard.
Yep.
If I
right.
recall
Yep.
properly. And if you listen to any of his drum tracks from start to finish, you could isolate just the drums and you can find a ton of musicality in what he's doing. And, he's not always hitting snares on the downbeat, and he's not always, playing something that you would expect necessarily in a rock song.
Yeah.
From start to finish, you feel it evolve.
Yeah.
And you kind of have a sense for the crescendo, and you have a sense for, where the builds are and all the different things. And that's what I try to accomplish with building a drum track from samples.
And I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Syncopation in rock drumming isn't common necessarily. It's, you don't hit on the off beats, right? Like, you just don't do it very often. It's a funk thing, it's a jazz thing. But then when you put it into a rock song, it changes the dynamic of that song to make it sound awesome when you blend it with the rest of the rock music, right? So the guitars and the vocals and stuff. So I think a lot of that time, it's something that a standard drummer might not think about, but a good drummer will. Neil Peart or I should say Peart, I believe is how it's pronounced. But some of these really, really great drummers, Mike Mancini, all these guys that just go out there and just absolutely, like, they have their own metronome playing for each limb. And it's like, how do you know what you're supposed to hit at the right time for each thing? And it makes no sense, but that's, obviously you can kind of replicate that with a drum machine. A lot easier than asking a buddy, hey, come over and do this thing that I want to play on the drums.
Most definitely. Yeah.
So I know another thing that you actually had mentioned was that not only are you finding that you have a deeper, more interested passion around understanding drums and drum, musicality and all that stuff, but also playing the bass. You've been a lead guitar player for 25 years or so, and now you're really digging the bass. So kind of explain that experience and what's that led to with the music now as well.
Yeah, I think that came from building drum tracks and from kind of learning how the bass and the drums are sort of married, with one another. They kind of can't exist without the other. And, you consider a drummer and the bass player sort of the rhythm section of the band. And that was something I never appreciated when I was, off in my own world trying to rip a guitar solo or not
like,
paying.
You guys keep time. I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. I'll do whatever, I want to do and not really pay attention to the flow of the song, and try to take up too much attention on stage. And, meanwhile, you got the drummer and the bass player in the background trying to keep everything together. They're the glue of the band, trying to hold down the rhythm and hold down the groove. And that's something that I've really grown to appreciate about bass. It's such a different approach to playing a stringed instrument than playing rhythm guitar or lead guitar. Like, it's really
essentially a mix between string and percussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's very percussive. if you play it well, it's very percussive anyway. It can still be very melodic, and you can find, find those areas for those walking lines and those little lead lines and the space in between where you can really accentuate the groove of the song. But really it comes down to locking into that kick drum, locking into those downbeats, and finding the space in between what everybody else is doing so that you're not overplaying. It's really easy. It's easy to overplay any instrument, but it's really easy to overplay bass.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say. More than anything, I think with playing bass, it's what you don't play that makes things
absolutely even better. Yeah. And best players in the world know when not to play. That's the most important thing sometimes that you can do.
Yeah, and I think it's pretty interesting because of all the band members, everybody always thinks the bassist is the most expendable, and I'm like, there's so much. And I talked to a few musicians about this, and one of the things I think that comes up is there's an emotion behind the bass that gets tied to the sound. What I mean by that is the drums are the rhythm, the groove, right? So like you hear that gets your body moving, right? So that's like, this is how you're going. The lyrics and the vocals and the guitar are all the high end stuff that your brain's kind of capturing. The bass is actually what your body's feeling, like literally feeling through speakers, right? It's like, and not only are you feeling that in your body, but then it kind of seeps into the emotion of the song and how that changes whether the guitar is slow or fast. The bass, whatever's happening with the bass, is actually the end result of how the song feels to somebody.
Yeah, totally. And you're right. I mean, those are the frequencies that you're hearing them with your ears a little bit, but you're very much feeling them with your body, especially when you get down, like 200 hertz and below.
Yeah.
That is stuff that is all feel. And, if you're looking for, whether it's dance music or hip hop or whatever, or even good rock music, like you need that good bass line. For the danceability of the song, for the groove of the song, and for the feeling of the song. Without it, it's, I don't know if you've ever tried to play a show without a bass player, but, it's nothing like playing with a bass player. Like you have to have that instrument there. Even if you're not hearing a whole hell of a lot of it, you got to have it there or something is just wrong. It
sounds not, missing. Something's not happening.
Yeah. So whether it's, playing a bass part on a synth or something, like you have to have that low end. It's absolutely critical to a song.
Yeah. And obviously it's nothing to say about, people that play slap and pop style where it's like funk and it's a little higher on the octaves and the frets and the range and the frequencies. But most of those bass players still bring it back down to the low end for certain parts of the song. It's not like they're staying all up on the high and just plucking and popping and stuff, but you can definitely tell the difference between the feeling of a song where somebody's playing slap and pop versus somebody who's playing the low register and just kind of playing with percussion.
Sure.
So it's I think it's an astute observation that a lot of people don't even, especially non-musicians, don't even think about, and even people who are kind of in bands, not like you said, not the bass player, don't even think about the actual character that the bass brings to the band. And when you don't have that there, you know that something's missing.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people, when you're starting a band, when you're 20 years old or whatever, nobody wants to be the bass player. You have 1,000 people who already play guitar and think that they're the world's greatest songwriter. And then somebody else, who's been singing in their shower or singing karaoke their whole life, they think that they're the next, Rod Stewart or Steve Perry. And so you've got the lead singers, you've got the guitar players. And then what do you do to find a bass player? You go, oh, well, Jim knows how to play guitar. So let's go down to Guitar Center and buy a bass. You can figure out how to do that. No problem. All right, Jim, you're the bass player in the band. Let's go start a band.
Yep,
so it is it's a forgotten instrument in certain regards. But the deeper you dig into, the required components of actually having a dynamic band, the more you appreciate how important that bass aspect is.
Yeah, and I actually talked to, and this will be an upcoming episode after this one, but I talked to the drummer from the punk band Clowns, and he actually said basically nobody's a bass player; they're all converted from something else. And that's exactly right.
Yep.
Like you can only find a solid bass player if they've already played bass in a band after they converted from something else. But yeah, nobody ever starts on bass, it seems like. But back when I was in high school, I actually, 3 people I convinced to do bass from nothing. I was like, you're going to be the bass player, but it was like me pushing him. Right. So I was a friend, 2 friends in high school for my high school band. And then it was actually our mutual friend, Joe, who actually became an excellent drummer. I convinced him to buy a bass so we could play music together. And then he was like, well, let's get a drum set too. And I was like, all right, well, we bought a drum set, shared that. And he got way more into the drums, and we just didn't have a bass player again.
Yep.
So that's pretty much how it goes. But yeah. And now one thing I actually always found fascinating about you as a musician is that you picked up a lot of things pretty damn quickly. And I'd say that you've been good at guitar for a long time. So, and this is, like you said, you were also in golf, and you have like a lot of these other like random hidden talents. Like you can throw washers into a flat board better than me for some reason. I'm like, what the hell? Like, how are you better at all these dumb things than me? And like the things that I like guitar and golf, you're also better than me. And I'm like, you're a son of a bitch. But I've always thought that was pretty awesome. And I always looked up to a lot of the things you did because I'm actually older than you, but at the same, and I've been playing longer than you, but at the same time, you pick things up faster because I think you got into one thing where I was into kind of spreading my, I guess, musical talents across multiple instruments. So that way I can figure out how to make one song and compose it. Whereas you were like locked in. So what do you think is like, maybe that's it, or maybe there's something else, but what is the key to getting good at something from your perspective? Because, like I said, you're good at golf, you're good at pool, you're good at all these other things, but it's not just random. Like you don't just pick it up one day and like, hey, I'm awesome at this thing.
Getting obsessed with something, like you said, I have a tendency to kind of lock into one thing for long periods of time. And with guitar, particularly with lead guitar, that was something where I just found myself constantly wanting to pick a guitar up and run through scales or see what a new thing sounded like, or just, repetition over and over and over and over again. And I had some other people when I was first picking it up that, were maybe even more driven than me, or I shouldn't say maybe, they were definitely more driven than me. And so I was able to look up to them and go, holy shit, like you know how to play that. I better up my game here, because you're going to be running laps around me pretty soon if I don't figure out how to keep up. So I have, in recent years, maybe gone the opposite direction, where I've started to try to like dabble in different things, and now probably find myself spread a little bit too thin across, too broad a spectrum. And I'm trying to kind of rein it back in and focus a little bit more on, just a few things. So I find myself now playing more rhythm guitar, trying to learn other people's songs, which is something that I never used to take the time to do. I always wanted to write things on my own and come up with new, unique things that nobody else had ever heard of. But now I'm finding a greater appreciation for, learning what other people play and kind of getting an idea from their perspective of how they approach songwriting, or why they do a certain thing a certain way. And, that can be beneficial to your playing too, because again, you can get locked into, again, like I talked about before, you get locked into a rut in your own playing. You develop your own habits, and some are good, some are bad, and some you rely on way too much. And, learning other people's music is a good way to break out of those habits sometimes and learn a fresh approach to doing something.
100%. Yeah. I mean, you don't even realize that some certain songs have a certain sound that you can't replicate until then you try to figure out how to play it. And you're like, oh, it's just a 7th chord or a minor chord. And you're like, I would have never even thought to play that weird little chord that makes that sound unless you picked up and try to learn somebody else's music. Same thing with like little riffs or little leads, right? Like, oh, here's like a really cool, lead part that's on the lower register of the guitar versus all playing up in the, 12, 15, fret area and just leading up there. So, a lot of people like to shred and go high because it sounds really cool and it's like a wailing sound, but there's a lot of low end lead that, if you go listen to some songs that have low end lead, you're like, that's equally fascinating. But most, I think, average music fans or whatever kind of glaze over that because it's not ripping and shredding into their ear, right? So there's a lot of things I think, and you're right, that when you go into it and look at the deeper parts of it, I've actually spent more time in the last 5 years or 4 years learning more of that stuff, because for I don't know 15 years I kind of got lazy and only played whenever I wanted to. And when I played when I wanted to, I'd only be strumming and rhythm and making a song, or, you know, just playing a cover just to play, just to keep up, but never really digging into some of that other stuff. So yeah, I agree. Like, you know, I listen to a lot of Joe Walsh lately, and his little riffs are seemingly insanely easy to play. And then you go to try to play it and be like, how the hell does he do this so effortlessly? It's insane.
Yeah.
But yeah. So cool. So as you're starting to go, obviously home recording, home, everything, right? I mean, nobody really has to go out into a studio these days if they don't want to, but they do have to get the skills, right? But is there anything like maybe gear wise that you're finding has helped you either, you know, past live shows to kind of get a sound that you want, or home recording, or just anytime that you want to sit down and actually play music? Is there anything that you use that is kind of like, without this, I probably wouldn't be making music to a level that I want?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of starts with a decent enough computer, unfortunately, that can handle a digital audio workstation without a ton of latency, and
Yeah.
a DAW that has some of those tools that can be really beneficial, like a good compressor. A good compressor is something that is worth its weight in gold, in my opinion, for getting your songs right from the get-go to sound a little bit more professional.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those things where you can certainly overdo it, but compression it's used by everybody, and it's something that if you're not finding the ways to tastefully use compression in your home audio recordings, I recommend you take a deep dive on how to utilize just a basic compressor. I use Studio One as a workstation, and their stock compressor is awesome. I mean, it's crazy the number of things that you can do with it, whether it's just raising the noise floor on something, or kind of tempering the spikes in something that you might have maybe recorded too loud, or
Yeah.
you want to tame down a little bit, or you can use it as a de-esser for your vocals, which is something that, again, I think that's a great tool if you're recording at home and if you're singing at home in a less than ideal environment. Finding those ways to treat your vocals and process your vocals so they sound a little bit more professional, is really important. And
yeah, because anybody can sing into a microphone, but it sounds like you're maybe standing in a hallway or something if you don't do it right.
Yeah. And that being said, on this record, I found myself recording my vocals in a car a lot, which is kind of a unique approach. Maybe it's something that I didn't do on the first record, but most people don't have rooms that are treated, that are set up to do audio recording in.
Yep.
So the more you can do away from environments like that, I think the better. You can try to put up foam, and you can try to get in a corner of the room where you're minimizing the reflections and getting as good a sound you can, but nothing is going to be as good as a professionally done up studio. So going straight into the box, as they say, as much as you can, I think is really important. Just plugging straight in, and doing a lot of the processing and everything like that inside the workstation, instead of trying to put an amp in your room and mic the amp and get all your levels right that way. I think it's much easier to find yourself a good amp modeling pedal. I use one by Tech 21 that is freaking awesome. I think it's called a GT2. It's really simple. It gives you like 3 tones, and then it kind of mimics different mic placements on a cab, and gives you what appears to be a mic'd guitar sound, being played out of a tube amp or being played out of a stack, but you're avoiding all of the hassle and the stress of actually turning on that amp and finding the best place in the room and figuring out where you're supposed to put the mic.
Getting a good enough microphone to actually record it.
Getting a good enough microphone to actually deal with it, and not having to deal with the buzz and everything else that, is resulting from plugging into a high gain amp. So yeah, I think a good amp modeler, a good preamp, and then go to town, just go straight into the box and do a lot of that processing, get your levels right. Make sure that you're not, blowing
Yeah.
blowing the speakers out, and make sure that you're not recording too quietly, but get those levels somewhat close to right, and then do all your processing afterwards. You
Yeah.
can
And
get much better sounds that way, much faster.
I think a couple of like hidden things that a lot of people don't even think about is, what mic are you using to record? Because a standard regular singing microphone might not be good enough for the recording process that you might have, or, the cables that you're using might not
Yeah.
carry a
Yeah.
quality enough sound through them. And there's a lot of little things like that. So I would say, first of all, if you're looking at doing home recording, do some research, try to get a decent quality setup. Don't just, unless you're like me and just like, hey, I'm just doing demo tracks all the time. So it's like, it's not that big a deal. I can always go back and do it later. I do have decent microphones. I do have a decent, I use, Studio One as well and some of this other stuff. But yeah, I mean, you can always make it better. And that's the thing. You can end up spending more than you might even spend to go into a studio and record it if you just practice enough to go in for a couple of days, right? So there are ups and downs and pros and cons, but highly recommend spending some time learning about the systems. Obviously, what is de-essing? What is, what is a DAW? How does any of this stuff make any sense? And where does the compression come in? All that stuff is worth understanding if you're going to do home recording. So did you go through any sort of like YouTube training, or how did you kind of learn yourself?
Oh yeah, plenty of YouTube training. YouTube is amazing. I'd be lost without YouTube. There's a few people that also use Studio One that have tons of tutorials. Joe Gilder is one that comes to mind, that he's been out and about for years and years. I've relied on him quite a lot. And yeah, you just, if you want to figure out how something works, you want to figure out how to record vocals in a decent way when you don't have a decent room. You want to figure out how to work compressor on a guitar or on vocals or on a bass guitar, or you want to figure out how to EQ something, look it up on YouTube. There's endless content there. Yeah. And plenty of stuff that you can find that is, going to help you to be more than serviceable if you take the time to actually learn how those things work.
Yeah. And I know one for me, the biggest thing that I had an issue with was latency. So I found a way to bypass the latency finally. And now I can actually finally record tracks without having everything sound like it's off time. So I look forward to actually trying to re-record some stuff soon.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's kind of impossible to record when you've got that delay going on in the background.
And it might just be like less than a snap. Like it's that small, so you can't hear it right away. Then when you put the song together, you're like, something's not right. I can't tell which instrument it is, but the whole damn thing seems off now. Mm-hmm. And it gets really frustrating for sure. Mm-hmm. So were there any techniques, we'll go back to kind of talking about guitar playing. Were there any techniques or anything that like you had some challenges around when you were first learning, or was there something that when you discovered how this thing worked, or this scale worked, or this, plucking technique, or was there anything like that when you first started that kind of like took your guitar playing to another level?
Learning syncopated rhythms, I think is huge. A lot of people, when you go to strum on a guitar for the first time, you're going to have a natural rhythm. You're going to have a natural kind of cadence to your body. Like everybody has a natural rhythm and cadence to how they walk and how they talk. And that lends itself to how you strum on a guitar as well. So again, learning how other people strum a guitar, like I, for one, I would never go and strum only downbeats. Like a lot of punk songs, you got that just straight down. That is not natural to me whatsoever. I would never pick up a guitar and think to do that. So learning how to do that, learning how to, incorporate palm muting into something like that, or just the occasional uptick into something like that, just to throw the rhythm off just for a second. I think those things are huge. And so being able to learn some of those things and incorporate some of those things into my rhythm playing were monumental for helping me to become, a more proficient rhythm guitar player for sure.
Yeah. And that's actually interesting that you mentioned that, because about 4 years ago, I was playing with my dad. He's a huge old country fan, Johnny Cash, all that kind of stuff. And that's always like it's like the doom chicka doom chicka doom chicka doom. And I'm like, what kind of rhythm is that? That would never think to even play that rhythm. It sounds like a train, kind of like chugga 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 chugga. And I'm just like, okay, so every time I would sit there and think to listen to it, I'm like, my natural is like doon diddle diddle doon diddle. It's like a 4 or 5 part strumming pattern. And it's never like a doon chicka doon or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I had to really like focus and figure out how they did it. And so it's like bass note, couple strums, bass note, couple strums. And I'm like, that's not natural at all for me to strum that. And so I think you're right. I mean, a lot of that stuff is the way that you can get out of your own head is by getting into somebody else's head and bringing that back into yourself. Because, you know, I've been solo essentially as a guitar singer or guitar player, singer songwriter for, I don't know, 20 years now. I have played drums in a band once, but in between, it's like you're just listening to yourself. And if you don't bring in extra places to get influences and new ideas, you're going to sound so similar that you're going to get sick of yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes eliminating something from the equation can be really important too. You know, like I heavily relied on a pick for the first 15 years or so that I played guitar. Everything was picked. The last 3 years or so, I have hardly picked up a pick the entire time. I kind of forced myself to learn how to finger pick and to learn how to strum with just, you know, my forefinger and my thumb. And that has helped me to evolve quite a bit and to kind of learn new approaches. And I'm glad that I did. You know, at first it was just extremely painful. Not only emotionally painful because I couldn't play anything in time. I couldn't keep, you know, a good rhythm. Everything was off. I would miss strings. I would flub notes. I would, you know, it was horrible. Not to mention the fact that I wasn't practicing enough. So, you know, then you throw that into the equation too. And it was a circus of a mess. But then, you know, also people have a tendency to maybe underappreciate the physicality of playing guitar strings and what it does to your fingertips when you're playing over and over and over again. You know, it can really wear away at your fingers. So it's been good for me to build up those calluses on my right hand too. You know, you got them on your left hand from fretting all the time, and you know,
I thought you were saying something else by doing that.
Yeah. We can edit that out, right? But yeah, it's been good for me to exercise that right hand a little bit more and get more proficient with some of those things. And you know, next step for me is again trying to go a little bit further down that road with learning some of those traditional finger picking techniques, like Travis picking is one, chicken picking, stuff like that you hear it in country songs and bluegrass and all sorts of stuff. It comes very naturally to some people, does not come naturally to me at all. So, you know, learning
Spanish flamenco styles, like I don't even understand that. Like I don't think I'll ever be able to comprehend the level of speed that it takes in your right hand to play that. Cause like I can't even play that fast with my left hand. So I'm like, to try to multiply that effort twice, I'll be like, nah, I'm definitely lost. But I cannot believe how people can do that.
Yeah,
so
no
well.
kidding.
Yeah. Cool. So I want to obviously have you kind of explain more and just kind of re-mention the new Saintly Patience EP one more time before we go. What can they expect from the music? Where can they go check it out once it's ready?
What can you expect from the music? Some auditory chaos, I think. There's a lot of stuff that I listen to and I go, oh man, I should have done that differently. I should have EQ'd that differently. I should have tweaked that a different direction. But, you know, I guess you got to call done sometimes. And, you know, it was definitely time for me to be done with this project and move on to something new. There's some longer songs on this one than I traditionally have written in the past. There's a couple that are up over 6 minutes and, you know, definitely venturing into more of kind of a prog rock realm. Got some pretty heavy guitar solos in there that I'm really proud of, and will certainly have a tough time recreating live if if I'm ever asked to play them live. And that's another one of those downfalls of home recording is you can find yourself in a groove sometimes, and you know you're just going, not thinking about it. You know, you're recording and just whatever comes, and sometimes you play something where you go, whoa, that was awesome, definitely keeping that, and then you go back to try to replay it and you go, oh gosh, that how did I just played something that is actually beyond my capabilities. And I don't know that I'm going to be able to ever recreate that, but nonetheless, you know, they made their way onto the album. So
Yeah. And I keep saying, like, it's one of those things, like, I just keep thinking I'm a shitty guitar player because I can't recreate what I've recorded. But I'm like, I did it once, I could do it again. And I'm like, somewhat, mostly. I think it's
Yeah,
there.
I mean, again, I think it just probably comes down to repetition. And
Yeah.
if you start playing it back over and over and over again, first of all, figure out what the damn notes are, because
Yeah.
that's hard enough. If you don't have a great ear for music theory, or you're not, naturally or not naturally inclined, but if you don't understand music theory, if you don't understand the movement of the music from a theoretical standpoint, it can be kind of difficult to go back and figure out what the hell you were playing. But figure that out first, and then you just play it over and over and over again. And, eventually you get something that's at least close enough that it's passable.
Yeah.
Somebody will listen to it and go, okay, well, it sounds close enough to the original thing, so we'll let it fly.
Yeah. And you could just say, oh no, I messed it up that time, like I've always done.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, it's 6 songs. 5 of them have lyrics. One's an instrumental. The lyrics, I've been spending a lot of time with my wife and kids in the last 5+ years. I mean, my oldest kid is going on 8 years old now, and all the songs that I had written for the first album came prior to me having a wife and kids. And so, they were largely based on non-relationship sort of themes and motifs. And now this one tends to be a little bit more about kind of the struggles of, dealing with the same person each and every day. And many of them probably coming more from her perspective than mine, because I'm probably much more frustrating than she is to have to deal with on a regular basis. So, it's kind of digging into my own insecurities and digging into my own fundamental flaws as a human being, which, can lead to some emotional moments for me. It's been interesting typing out the lyric sheets and everything to these as I get them finalized for distribution and everything. And I find myself going, oh man, that's kind of heavy. that is probably kind of one of the tough aspects of me being me. But sometimes digging into your own insecurities and your own failures as a human being is a good spot to find some creative juices for making good music.
Yeah, and ideally to help you grow, but if not, well, then maybe you just make better music because you don't grow.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like those people who get into relationships just to break up so that they've got fuel for their next album or for their next movie or whatever.
Are you talking about Taylor Swift?
I don't know if whomever, but yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Commoneer Music, on Instagram at Commoneer Music. Got a website, commoneer.net. Basically, it's just both of the EPs sitting up there. I've got dreams and aspirations of putting a blog up there or doing something else with it all in due time. But right now, the focus is just on getting this album out and getting all the finishing pieces done there so that I actually have something to promote and something to look back on and say it's a completed project. So
nice.
That's kind of where I'm at right now. Oh, and then I would be remiss if I didn't mention Bandcamp, because you can go to Bandcamp right now, commoneer.bandcamp.com, and pre-order the album. That'll give you access to 2 of the tracks, and then first mover advantage when the album releases on 10/22.
Nice, awesome. And I can't remember the name of the songs. It's something with iron. What's the name of the iron?
Iron and Fire.
Iron and Fire. I believe it's on that song. You have a pretty ripping guitar solo, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that one ends with a guitar solo as an outro, which is kind of fitting. That concludes the album.
Yeah.
And lead guitar, again, it was kind of my original passion and something that I still, if anybody asked me to join a band right now, or I found the motivation to join a band right now, I could very well find myself joining in that lead guitar role. It's just always been something that I've really enjoyed. Some of my, biggest musical inspirations are great lead guitar players. And it's something that I find myself always wanting to kind of gravitate back towards. So probably fitting that, the album closes on a guitar solo.
Yeah. So I guess the moral of the conversation we had today, or the end result of the conversation, is somebody get Mitch into a band. He needs to get out of his house and away from his wife and kids.
Yeah, just maybe don't push my wife too hard on that, because I'm not so sure how well she'll take that. But
just come over to Mitch's house and practice.
Yeah, there you go. We'll practice in the garage. There you go.
Yeah. Awesome. We'll add the links to the music in the show notes below this episode. And did you have any final words that you want to mention or anything else that you had before we go? I personally think that, you've put out some fantastic music, both in bands and solo. And I think people, if they don't spend time learning and listening to new music from, independent artists and indie rock dads like yourself, then they kind of miss something with the music world and the community in general. So, I'll say that about you, but did you have anything that you wanted to kind of end with before we go today?
Yeah, I mean, I'll gladly add to that. I completely agree with you there. I think that we've maybe lost a little bit of individuality and nuance when it comes to radio music and the bigger producers and the acts that find themselves on the top 40 or whatever. It's all in my mind and in my ear, it's kind of becoming the same thing. You could almost play the songs on top of one another and end up with things sounding the same sometimes. So I would agree, go out and check out new bands on Bandcamp or Instagram or Twitter or wherever, and get a sense for what people are doing when they are not being influenced by, a greater machine. And that music machine is, it's good at what it does. It churns out the hits over and over and over again, but I think you do lose a lot of soul and passion and individuality sometimes. And that's not to say that my music is, chock full of all that. And, you're going to hear a lot more
passionless, and you're in it for the money. We get it.
Yeah, there you go. You're going to be able to hear a lot more mistakes. And I think a lot more of the process sometimes comes through in music that is independently produced and recorded. And, that can be interesting. It can be enlightening sometimes. And if you're trying to make music on your own, being able to listen to songs like that and learn from my mistakes, learn from other people's mistakes where, we probably didn't EQ everything properly, and we probably didn't compress everything properly. And we certainly didn't rely on perfect recording environments, but you end up with what you end up with, and then you move on. That's the only other thing that I'll add is, if you're trying to do this, just keep moving. Write a song, get it down on paper, get it down on your workstation, and, eventually move on to something else, keep growing, keep building, pick up another instrument, learn something new. As long as you keep doing that, you'll find the inspiration to keep making music. It's when you find yourself sitting in one spot for too long that inspiration sort of fades. And then, you find yourself lacking the desire to do it again. So keep moving.
That's my life in a nutshell. Thanks a lot, Mitch. That's a real downer for me. No, they're great words of advice. And I absolutely agree. If you want to make this either a long-term passion or hobby, or, want to take this to higher levels, you can't stop. You got to keep moving forward, and you got to find new ways to be creative, because, I've always thought like at some point I'm going to run out of song ideas, and somehow I never do, but they just come less often maybe than they used to. But that's because I'm less active than I used to be. So like the more active you become, the quicker everything comes. And that's just how it's going to be. So if you really want to keep this going, just keep going and actually do it. So great words of advice. Obviously, I want to thank my good buddy Mitch from Commoneer for the awesome conversation today. And if you haven't checked out his music yet, which you probably haven't, but this is a great introduction for you to do so, make sure to go to the show notes below this episode for all the links. If you like what you heard on the show, please make sure to subscribe to the podcast and share it with your friends on social media. Also, if you want to check out some of our written content or any of the products or merch that we have available, go to poweredbyrock.com to read our absolutely free rocking blog full of album reviews, interviews, and lists to keep you entertained. And go find our gear as well, so you can pick up some items to play and look like a rock legend. Actually, Mitch was technically our first sponsored musician. So there you go. He's first Powered by Rock sponsored musician. We got him some free gear. That's our show for today. We'll see you soon for the next episode. Until then, rock on.